Hey guys, real quick, before we jump into this week's episode, I wanted to let you know of a couple of opportunities you have to join us for a cross training event. First, here in Covington, Louisiana, on August 2nd, we're doing a fatherhood workshop. And here we're going to offer you a new resource that's going to guide dads through the kind of conversations that they need to have with their kids before the school year gets going. So we're going to set you up for a good school year with your kids, talking about things like setting thresholds for screen times, managing the morning and evening routines, and just creating a vision for your child's school year. So it'll be free food and a new free resource, August 2nd. Join us for that. But then also in October, we've got our Scotland conferences that are coming up. We're actually offering it twice this year, once in the north, once in the south. And this year is going to be all about spiritual leadership. And we want to help you to develop the wisdom and the character and the friendships that are needed to become a mature man of God who's leading in all areas of his life. So you can go to our website, find information about both of these events, and register for both of them there. I'll also include links in the show notes. Let's get going with this week's episode. All right, Joe, we are back on the podcast where we are training men in spiritual fitness. And I know you and I both hear from guys who are just stuck, spiritually speaking, Joe. And a lot of times the questions guys are asking is they're asking, what can I do? What can I begin to do today to get back on a path of spiritual growth? And I think that's a great question. Guys need to be facing the what's in their lives. What am I doing today? What can I do to change? What bad habits do I need to break? What good habits do I need to establish? But there's a question that I've noticed a lot of guys fail to ask when they find themselves stuck, when they're looking to get on a path of growth. And that's who. There's this question of who. Who are the people that are around me? Who are the people I need in my life right now? Who do I need to help me get on that path and to keep moving on that path of growth? So I wanted to kind of circle today's episode around one of the answers to that question, who, that I would want to point guys towards, and that's a mentor. So I want to think about the relationship that guys have with a mentor or even being a mentor. So I just want to toss this to you. Why do you think for Christian guys, mentorship is important at all?
You could give a lot of reasons. I'm going to limit myself to three. One reason I tell guys is with a mentor, you can avoid avoidable pain. Now, there's a lot of suffering in life that, it's not chosen. You get a diagnosis, you get an illness, and you just have to walk through that. But there's a lot of things that you can sidestep in life. And one of the great liabilities is what people often call confirmation bias, putting yourself around people that tell you what you want to hear. And it's interesting because in Proverbs, we read that, a wise man, he foresees evil and he hides himself. The simple pass on and are punished. And so this ability to, see something that's a danger, a mentor is another set of eyes. And so that they can actually spot something you can't see. I'll never forget, being in a situation where I thought I had a great idea and a mentor told me, don't mistake panic for inspiration. And in that moment, I was like, okay, I'm not inspired to panic. And I was exposed, but it helped me. So that's one reason, you can avoid avoidable pain. I think a second reason is a mentor can help draw forth the deep purposes of your heart. It's interesting the way in the scriptures, we hear that the heart is deceitful sometimes, that we need to be very careful. But we also hear that the counsel of a man's heart is like deep water. A man of understanding will draw it out. And so, often in life, one of the difficulties is it's not that there's a single good option. Sometimes there's multiple good options. And you're trying to figure out the will of God, and you need somebody who can ask questions. And it's almost like a bucket that pulls water from the deep parts of your heart, so you can begin to discern and filter, that decision and come to a choice that you wouldn't be able necessarily to have clarity about if you didn't have someone helping draw forth those deep counsels of the heart. So that's a second one. I think a third one is you want a mentor because ultimately seeking counsel is a habit that you want to develop. And you want to develop this habit for a couple of reasons. In those critical moments where you need an outside voice, if you've not become the kind of person that seeks counsel, the problem is in that critical moment, you're not going to seek any advice. And so if you've been going all by yourself through life without mentors, the moment that you actually need a mentor, you're not going to have them, partly because you're not the person who asks for advice, but secondly, that relationship is something that builds over time. And so, you might be in a season of life where things are going pretty well and you don't feel like you need many outside supports, but life is such that you're going to hit a juncture and you're going to need people in your life. And so you want to develop a habit of seeking mentors so that, again, in those critical moments, they're present and walking with you.
So I think some guys are going to hear that and they're going to maybe hear some similarities to things we've talked about in the past, as far as like having a spiritual friend. We talk a lot about spiritual friendship and that kind of relationship amongst Christian men. So can you make a difference here between spiritual friendship and mentorship? What is the difference between a mentor and some of those other relationships in life?
So here's my definition of a mentor, and it sounds a little bit complicated at first, but we can work through it and get some and simplify it. But my definition is that a mentor, this is an asymmetrical relationship for the sake of wisdom. And let me just break that down. When it comes to friendship, there are two people that roughly have the same dimensions. Friends are like each other. Often your friends are people who are similar age. They've maybe known the Lord for a similar length of time, similar level of maturity. There's a kind of symmetry between the parts. This is a relationship that's asymmetrical. There's somebody who's different from you. And typically they're different because they've got more experience. They've got more wisdom. And it's a asymmetrical relationship for the sake of wisdom. That's the key thing that you're pursuing through this. And my definition, again, I'll give you a definition of wisdom, but I think wisdom is hard-won perspective on life that comes by walking with God through the challenges of life. So, wisdom is something that's hard-won. You can read books and get knowledge. You don't get wisdom really from books. You've got to apply it in real concrete situations. So you've got somebody who's walked with God. That's critical. That's the wisdom. What does it look like to know God in the midst of the challenges of life, to have discerned and to have gleaned that wisdom in someone who can pass that on to you? And so again, a friend is often there. They're encouraging you. They're supporting you. They're with you. But they might not have much more perspective than you have. A mentor, they've got that higher elevation. They've been through that valley already. And so they're able to provide a kind of counsel to you that you and your friends don't have. And so, if you're looking in the New Testament, this is a Paul and a Timothy. It's a Paul and a Titus, an older man with a younger man, often really guiding them through the difficult terrain of just everyday Christian living.
Yeah. So I guess one thing I'd want to say to that is, I think you and I both know how difficult it is to maintain relationships, period, in life, right? Because relationships take time. So whether it be maintaining a good marriage, you have to invest time. Maintaining good friendships, it takes time. Now you're throwing a whole other relationship into the mix here as far as a mentor. So am I supposed to meet with a mentor every week? What is it? When are the right times in life to hold a mentor close and to have a mentor, to seek out mentorship?
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of questions. I think we need to first just ask the question: is this something that has to be regular, or can it be irregular? There's that question, and there's kind of a deeper question: are there critical moments, the wins that you really want to know that at those junctures there's a mentor in place? So just in terms of the regularity, irregularity, I think we need to keep things somewhat flexible. There's that common rule with relationships, with transmitting knowledge and character, that more is caught than taught. So a mentor, you might be thinking, okay, is this supposed to be every month we sit down and have a set conversation? I've had those kinds of relationships for seasons and they've been wonderful, but a lot of the people who've left the deepest impression, it wasn't that formal. It wasn't that regular, but I sought them out. We had dinner at various points. I hung out with them. They maybe don't even know that they're a mentor in my life, and yet they've left a really deep impression. And so I think you got to be flexible. You don't want to be too rigid. It doesn't have to be every week or every month. You might need more input during certain moments than in other times. So maybe months, maybe years will even elapse sometimes. But nonetheless, these are relationships that are present. Now, that deeper question is, when, in the sense of, okay, as you step back from life, when are those critical junctures that that you're going to face, and you want to be sure that you don't go through those times on your own. And I think there you really can identify some moments that it's important to seek mentors. And I'll speak broadly because there'll be men at different ages. One critical juncture, I think, would be when, you're leaving home. Whether you're going to college or university, or leaving college and university and starting life on your own. But the way God has built us, we start life with mentors. They're called mom and dad. They've got lots of input. But as you begin to step outside that roof, then you begin to need to seek out other people who are going to have a similar type role. And it's a big thing to start life. It's a big thing to get through college without making a lot of mistakes that you regret. So I think, that's a juncture. Step out on your own. I think another one we could identify would be, as you get married, as you have kids. Marriage is such a gift, but it's fraught with challenges. And to have someone who's been walking through marriage for 20 years, or as you have your first child who can tell you this is going to change that relationship and give, good advice, I think that's another critical juncture. And, if we just kind of fast forward, some other things I would say is those moments where you face a really big decision. So maybe, now you're in your mid-30s and you're thinking about changing jobs and you've been doing something for 10 years and you're not sure if it's a good idea. Those junctures where there's a kind of critical decision, Proverbs talks about not waging war without multiple counselors. So if you're going to do something big, involve other people. And so, you're thinking now mid-30s, and then I throw out one other to guys, and this would be the sort of midlife crisis that's very real. As you're hitting this age where, you're you've got so much responsibility, your energy is starting to wane. You're starting to realize you're not going to fulfill every dream that you had for yourself. It's a real thing in your, early 40s, mid 40s to hit a midlife crisis. And I think that's another sort of juncture. Walk through that with somebody who's been there already, and you're going to avoid some of that avoidable pain. And so those kinds of key moments in life, I think, are the kind of moments that we want to think, okay, I'm going to really need a mentor to get through these moments in a way that's really healthy.
Well, you did a great job of describing my life and midlife crisis, Joe. So I appreciate that. No, but for guys who find themselves maybe in one of those situations that you described, whether it be midlife crisis or having kids and getting married, give them something to start with. How do you go about finding this person, this who in your life? How do you go about finding a mentor?
Yeah, I think we can, kind of break it down into some fairly simple steps, and not like this kind of thing can just be a set of steps, but I know guys want something practical. And so I think if you're looking for a mentor, the first thing is you got to identify the right kind of person. And there's several criteria that we could talk about. I think a criteria, one of them would be just, I'd call the imitation criterion. So Paul talks about imitate me as I imitate Christ. I mean, you're not just wanting someone who sounds good. You're wanting someone whose life you can look at and say, they're not perfect, but I'd love my life to look more like theirs. Whether it's because of the way they father or husband, or the maturity they exhibit in the career that they have, but there's that imitation criterion. I think another criterion would be the listening criterion. I can think of people that I really admire. I've learned tons from watching them, but I'd never invite them to be a mentor because, frankly, they don't know how to listen. They can't get outside their own head. And so it's got to be somebody that is able to ask questions and listen carefully and really get inside your own heart. Another criterion would be the wisdom one. You've got to test, is what they say really worth hanging on to and thinking deeply about? But then the last criterion, and this is important if you're going to choose somebody, would be the availability criterion. I can think of people I've been really excited. I've said, hey, would you want to mentor me? Largely because they had a lot of influence. I looked at them and thought, oh man, how cool to get time with this person. And they actually said yes. And I was so excited, with the single problem that they never got back to me because they just didn't have time. There's no availability on their part. And so, just this first step would be this step. Make sure you can identify the right kind of person.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so identify the person, then do I just go up to him and say, hey, will you mentor me like for the rest of my life? Like, I don't know, give me what is the practical, what has somebody done to you if you've mentored somebody, or how have you approached someone that you wanted to mentor you?
Yeah, I think, and this would be kind of the second step, but would be, instigating the relationship. And there's a wrong way and a right way to do it. I think the wrong way, if you want to scare away 9 out of 10 really capable mentors is to go up and say, will you mentor me? Because the problem is that sets this bar that a lot of people, they don't exactly know what it means, and it scares them. And they don't feel like they'd be a competent mentor when the truth is they might have all the wisdom and all the character and the maturity that you need. And so the easy alternative route is just to use a different question, to just, simply say something like, I'm really struggling with some decisions in my life right now. Would you mind meeting up and talking about them with me? Or, I really admire your family. Could we ever talk about, your what you've done with your children? These kinds of things that you're avoiding the formal word, will you be my mentor? That question. But nonetheless, there's an area that they know that they probably have some competence. And so if you just can appeal to that, then they feel like they're able to bring you in. And so I would just, think about the kind of question that makes it easy for that person to feel like, okay, no, I can listen and I can, give some feedback in this area, and to not make it over formal and something that sounds like, you need some sort of degree to be able to do it well.
That's great. Those are way better questions than, hey, will you just meet with me every week and be my mentor for the rest of my life? That is daunting if somebody asked me that. Well, let me flip the script here. How do you go about being a mentor to someone else? We want to help guys not only find the relationships in their life that will, yes, guide them on a path of growth. And I think men need mentors in their life, especially in those transitional times. But man, I'd love to see a world of men, Christian men, who are stepping up to mentor others. This has to be cyclical in some form or fashion. So how do you go about being that mentor for someone else?
I think you've got to begin with the question, are you ready to be a mentor? And you've got to think specifically about the person who's in front of you. There are different types of relationships, important relationships in the Christian life. So, we talk a lot about friendship in cross training. And you can be a friend to someone without needing that wisdom and that maturity that, in a sense, goes beyond what they have. So there's the friendship. You can even disciple somebody if you don't have that much more wisdom or experience than someone. You can go to them, and often with discipleships, it's like, hey, would you like to read the Bible with me? And so in a sense, you're training together. But with wisdom, there does have to be that sense that you know enough about the scripture and you've had enough life experience that you're able to, helpfully have input with someone. And so it's a relative question. So if you're a man in your early 20s, the difference between a 17-year-old and a 22-year-old each year is so big that you might be able to mentor, the high school student. But if you're honest, you might not be able to mentor another 22-year-old. Because you're at the same point. You've not really made these decisions. And so you don't have a whole lot to offer. You can be their friend, you can be in a discipling relationship, but mentor might be the wrong kind of thing. And so I think that first thing is just ask yourself, okay, does this meet, the kind of relationship that I could have that kind of input? If the answer is yes, well, then again, I think there's some ways that guys can grow into, develop the skills that a mentor needs. And, one of those skills is you've got to be able to ask good questions. The key thing with mentorship, it's not having all the answers, but going back to that proverb about, counsel in the heart of man is like deep waters. You want to ask the questions that expose and enable, those things that the guy doesn't fully see himself, but to let that counsel surface in his heart. So, you want to be somebody who can ask good questions. You want to be someone who really listens well. You're not just waiting for that moment that, you can say what you think you already know, but really to practice active listening. But I think the other thing would just be, we've got to be so careful if you're in a mentorship relationship to actually give advice. And so I would use the comparison, think of a doctor with a patient. How careful a doctor needs to be to prescribe medication. Is this what this person really needs? And you've got to ask, when you give advice, it's a dangerous thing. And, to go back to having a mentor, even a mentor, if you have someone in your life with wisdom, you still want to test that. You want to test anything anyone tells you. But if you're in the position of offering counsel, you really want to think, do I have something to say? And if, often it's okay if you don't have the right words, simply to, pray with someone, to recognize the difficulty of the situation and to encourage them to take time. You don't want to be the oracle that has the answers for everything. Ultimately, the goal, it is helping them walk with Christ, looking to God's word, having a spirit of prayer. there's nothing more important that a mentor can do than to encourage those kinds of deep dispositions of the heart.
That's great. And I think that where we make and land this is just by asking guys to ask maybe a second question. We asked the question who, but maybe you need to today ask the question where. Where am I in life right now? Am I in a transition point? Am I in a transition of like in my 40s and midlife crisis? Am I in a point where I just had kids and I got that fresh on the brain? Am I in a transition of marriage or schooling, whatever? Find out where you are and then look to somebody that's a few steps ahead of you. And that's your who that you need to look to and use all the criteria that Joe talked about. But then also, where are you in relation to other people that maybe haven't gone through those phases of life yet, haven't hit those transitions where you are at yet? And look to be a mentor to those people and use the criteria again that Joe has described here. I hope that's a help to you guys. I hope we do, man. We want to see guys who are growing and building a lifestyle that puts Christ first. And by doing that, you're going to need guys that are ahead of you, that are there to mentor you during these challenging times in life, these life transitions. And man, please be that for other guys. So y'all go out and do that today and join us again for another episode of the Cross Training Ministries podcast.